Shabbat Shalom. I want to start with a quick story. In the summer of 1998, I was 14 years old, and that was the first time I came out. I knew exactly who I was and who I wanted to be. I am not one for slow processing. I wasn't one for privacy even back then, so I immediately told most of my friends and my parents, and the reactions I received were less than positive. My parents completely flipped out. They were certain that it would mean that I would have a difficult life. Some kind of alternative lifestyle is a word my mom used a lot in those days. That I would never have children, that I would somehow be lesser than, different than, not quite normal. She mourned. It was dramatic. And my friends were awkward. And it was a horrible summer. Truly, truly horrible. And as quickly and as confidently as I came out of that closet, I went right back in. And I barely discussed my queerness. I barely thought about it. Didn't really even process my own identity again until I went to college. My teen years were not carefree. They were not happy years of growth and self-discovery. I was depressed and scared and insecure, and I was deeply pessimistic about my future. And as I was growing up, I was also deeply involved in my synagogue community. It was my second home. I was so close to all the people in it, and I came to services every week, and I loved being Jewish. But I never came out to my rabbi. I never told my cantor, my youth director. I was too afraid of their rejection. There was no one out in that community. There were no queer couples. There were no out educators. And when I look back on that time, I actually deeply regret that I never trusted them. And I think I wasn't as closeted as I thought I was. Because my youth advisor gave me a Marge Piercy book, and the cantor made me a mixtape of the Indigo Girls and Melissa Etheridge. And in fact, it turned out that that youth director ended up being queer and marrying a queer rabbi, and they invited me to their wedding a few years later when I was in college. They tried to reach out to me, and they tried to connect with me, but it was the 90s. It wasn't direct enough. They didn't ask the right questions, and I didn't have the bravery or really the trust to think that they could be there for me. Now, I feel so blessed that as I came into adulthood and my life evolved and I brought my own children into this world, my mom has admitted that I live the most, stereotypical of lives, spouse, children, job. And our world is just different from that world that I think most of us were raised in. Technically, I am the first out rabbi to be on the TI Bima, but I'm not actually the first queer rabbi at Temple Israel, and I'm certainly not the only queer rabbi at Temple Israel, and we are certainly not the last queer rabbis at Temple Israel. In fact, there are so many incredible models and leaders that are here for our kids today that I just didn't have when I was growing up. And there's a lot of people to thank for that incredible work. Leaders here, leaders around the country and throughout Boston who have made sure that queer and trans Jews feel seen, loved, known, invited, protected, cared for, and respected. One of the giants that created the world that we all get to live in and that I get to raise my kids in is here with us tonight, our dear friend, Idit Klein. Idit is a dear friend of mine and a dear friend of this community. She is the president, the CEO, and founder of Keshet, the National Organization for LGBTQ+ Equality in Jewish Life. Now, Idit founded Keshet from her JP living room in 2001, and she built it from a small operation to this national organization with offices in 6 states and a huge multi-million-dollar budget. And under her leadership, Keshet has mobilized tens of thousands of Jewish leaders, trained them, worked with them, provided support for them to make sure that LGBTQ+ equality is a communal value and a priority for all of us. She has helped teens find their place. She has created so many spaces and places that have made it possible and beautiful to be a queer or trans Jew in our community. And there is still so much work to do. I would also like to say that I met my wife Jojo at a Keshet event, even though that doesn't usually make it into your bio.
I should change that.
You should, probably. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Idit, as we celebrate Pride and remember that it takes each of us, queer or straight, transgender or cisgender, it takes all of us to make sure that our Jewish community is a loving, welcoming, joyful place for all Jews. Thank you so much for joining us. We welcome you.
So as I thought about my remarks for tonight, it didn't even occur to me to lead with the fact that one of the rabbis here met her spouse through Keshet, which is something we should be very, very proud of. So I'm glad that you shared that, Susie. And I am indeed very proud of your marriage and the other marriages that came about through Keshet. It really is so meaningful for me to be here at Temple Israel this Pride Month. This is actually my last Pride Month as Keshet CEO. And it's meaningful for me to be here at Temple Israel because back when I started building Keshet in 2001, this community was our first public source of support. It was in this community where there were rabbis who were willing to publicly stand with us at a time when there were very, very few rabbis who were willing to publicly stand with us. It was in this community that where then Senior Rabbi Bernard Melman officiated at this shul's first same-sex wedding between David Passer, Zichrono Livracha, and Mark Maxwell, who remains an active member. So I want to start by saying thank you, Temple Israel. Thank you for standing with me, for standing with Keshet, and for standing for LGBTQ plus equality, back when very few were, and throughout all the years since, and knowing that you will continue to do so into the future. And Shabbat Shalom, and Pride Sameach. So I say Pride Sameach, but at the same time, I know that our simcha, our joy, this pride, is tempered. With the recent terrible attack in Boulder, the tragic shootings at the Jewish Museum, and the rise in anti-Semitism more broadly, this is not an easy pride. With the Israel-Hamas war well into year 2, and now an emerging war with Iran, with hostages in Gaza at day 616, as the cantor said earlier, and tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, while those remaining alive, on the whole, facing dispossession and starvation. This is not an easy pride. And here in the States, we see relentless, vicious attacks on the LGBTQ community, most particularly on transgender children. We see immigrants disappeared from the streets, from courthouses, from their places of work, and so very much more that makes this not an easy pride. But I believe it is a necessary pride. It's a necessary pride for all of us who believe in justice, who believe in LGBTQ equality, and perhaps for Jews, this year in particular, this not easy pride can be a gift. For Pride is a time for all of us to remember that despite it all, we are resilient. It's a time to remember that even in times of sorrow and despair, we know how to rejoice and how to find hope. It's a time for us to remember how to embrace the power of our authentic selves. I've been doing the work of creating space for LGBTQ Jews to be our full selves for the past 24 years. And over the course of those years, many people have said to me, "So how is it that you became a professional queer Jew?" So if you believe it, this was not a career path I knew about growing up. And my third grade Orthodox rabbi is a key part of my answer to that question. I had transferred from a public school to an Orthodox day school at the start of third grade. I'd never seen a Chumash, a book of Torah, before, so on my first day of school, my rabbi took me aside and he put a Chumash on the desk in front of me and he flipped it open. And he pointed at the center of the page and he said, "Look, here is the main story." And then he pointed at the left-hand column and at the bottom half of the page, and he said, and here are what two different people have to say about that story. And a lot of times they disagree. And sometimes I disagree with them. And sometimes you may disagree with them. And you know what? Sometimes you may even disagree with me. And then he bent down so he could look me right in the eye, and he said, "But I want you to remember, I always want to know what you think." So there I was, an 8-year-old girl growing up in a secular Israeli family, and there I was handed the keys to Jewish tradition. I was told, "You are an inextricable part of the collective Jewish story, no question." Now, I'm not saying that my Orthodox Jewish day school education was the straight shot to my starting to build Keshet in 2001, but for sure, my education there shaped my identity as a Jew and my sense of self as a leader. So it's 24 years after I started building this organization, as Susie said, out of the top floor of a triple-decker a mile and a half or so from here. And so very much has changed. So this Erev Shabbat, what I'd like to do is share a few stories about the arc of change as I see it. So when I first started building Keshet in the early 2000s, most straight Jewish community leaders, not at this synagogue, but elsewhere with whom I shared what I was doing, literally didn't understand what I was talking about. They would look at me kind of bewildered, and they would say, "Wait, is that a Jewish organization? Is that work you're doing in the Jewish community?" Or they would say, "Huh, I never thought about it before. So gay and lesbian Jews, are there many of you?" These days, these are the kinds of responses I get. I hear, "Oh, wow, could you come work with my synagogue?" Or, "My granddaughter is trans, how can I connect her with you?" Or, this is actually the most frequent, "My kid is gay and just graduated from college and is really smart. Do you have a job for him?" And indeed, we are connected with many LGBTQ Jewish young people. We bring together queer Jewish teens at Shabbatonim or weekend retreats. And these are places where queer Jewish teens discover that they can exhale. Many of these young people tell us that the Keshet Shabbaton is the only place in their lives, still in 2025, the only place where they can be fully themselves as LGBTQ Jews. Over and over at these retreats, what we hear from kids are words like, "It just feels amazing to be somewhere where I can be myself as a queer Jew." They also experience a lot of joy together. Some of them call it queer Jewish euphoria. They have queer prom, they dress up, they look fabulous, they dance, they laugh, they hug. They hug a lot. I am so grateful that teens feel this kind of joy at Shabbatonim, especially now and in the past couple of years. In the aftermath of October 7th, we've started hearing a lot of young people talk about being excluded from queer spaces because of their Jewish identities and or their connections with Israel. And we've also heard a lot of queer Jewish young people talk about being excluded from Jewish spaces because of their critical views of Israel. A queer teen from Iowa told us, "I so enjoyed being able to exist as both Jewish and queer in peace at the Shabbaton. I feel like Jewish spaces are becoming more unaccepting of queerness, and nowadays queer spaces are more unaccepting of Jewishness. So I just can never get a rest because I'm on the lookout for homophobia or transphobia or anti-Semitism wherever I am. But at the Keshet Shabbaton, I could rest." And of course, that sense of isolation and vulnerability has increased exponentially since the inauguration. We actually held a Shabbaton 2 weeks after the election in Texas for kids from the Southwest. And what we heard from kids was, "I fear for my life. Even though I have support, I am so scared. I'm starting to feel really guilty because my being trans puts my family in danger. We are disposable to America." These words are really painful to hear. But thankfully, they're not the only words that teens have been saying since the election. Teens are also speaking to the power of community and how that lifts them up, connects them to their resilience, and helps them remember their strength. It is really meaningful to me that Keshet is providing these spaces that feel safe, supportive, and powerful for queer Jewish youth. And at the same time, it's just so sad to me that in 2025, there are so many queer Jewish kids who still feel so alone in both their queer and Jewish communities. So communities like this one and work like I'm describing, these are the antidotes to that isolation. From our earliest days at Keshet, we have met Jewish organizations wherever they are and pushed them, sometimes gently, sometimes a little less than gently, pushed them to grow and stretch and get further than they ever imagined possible. We've always urged Jewish leaders to speak out for LGBTQ equality. And since January, we have become even more insistent in telling Jewish leaders how absolutely urgent it is that they make clear to their students, their congregants, to all their community members, no matter what you may be hearing from the Oval Office, no matter what you may be hearing from your state house, we want you to know that here in our Jewish community, we will do everything we can to keep you safe. Here in our Jewish community, you are seen, you are loved. Here in our Jewish community, when you come out, we will tell you Mazal Tov. And here in our Jewish community, we will never, ever stop fighting for you. Messages matter. Symbols matter. I have found myself, not surprisingly, over the last few months, thinking back to the 2016 election. Remember that one? 2 days afterward, I received an email from a Hillel director named Erin Schreiber, who worked at a college outside of St. Louis. She wrote to me that early that morning, she had gotten a text from a trans student who was terrified and in crisis. And so she said to him, kind of without thinking, "Meet me at the Hillel office in 15 minutes. So she basically jumped out of bed and into her car and started driving to the Hillel office. And then it suddenly dawned on her that she was a wreck. And how was she possibly going to support this kid? And what would she possibly say to him to offer support? So she walked into the Hillel building and opened her office door, not knowing what she would say. And then as she opened her office door, she nearly stepped on an envelope that was there in front of her, picked up the envelope, saw that it was from Keshet. Inside were the LGBTQ Jewish Safe Zone stickers she had ordered the previous week, very presciently, it turns out. So when her student walked in, she held up the sticker, and she said, "Look, there is hope in the world. We have a whole community and communities all over the country that are standing with us." So over the past 9 years, and again, increasingly over the last few months, I have thought of this student whose name I don't know, whose name I may never know, but I have thought of him and hoped that he looks back on that morning when he felt despair and hopelessness and turned to his Jewish community for support and found it. We must continue to push for change in our own communities so that every teacher, every rabbi, every Hillel professional like Erin knows how to build a community where queer Jews know that we belong. And these are conversations that we also have to be brave enough to have outside of the boundaries of our Jewish communities. At Keshet, since a few weeks after October 7th, we've been speaking directly with some of our partner organizations in the LGBTQ world. We've reached out to them at times when they've used language around Israel and Gaza that we have found hurtful or problematic in some way. We've asked for their support and solidarity in responding to anti-Semitism. I'll tell you one story. So last year, as we were entering Pride season a little bit earlier than now, a lot of LGBTQ Jews were feeling afraid for the first time. Not of right-wing homophobes or transphobes attacking us, but of our LGBTQ community members harassing or even physically attacking us. We had long conversations among the senior staff at Keshet and brought the board in as well about whether it was responsible for us to participate in prides around the country. There were some people who argued very strongly that we should not, that we needed to keep our people safe. But in the end, we decided that we wanted to do both, keep our people safe and, of course, be at Pride. And so what we did was devise a number of recommendations for Pride organizers around the country. And we reached out to 17 leaders of prides in cities and towns around the nation. And we shared our recommendations and we shared our concerns. And they were, and I have to say, we were quite surprised, they were remarkably to a person receptive. But one interaction in particular stands out for me. And this was at Miami Pride. When our people arrived to line up for the parade contingent, they saw that our partner organization, Equality Florida, the statewide LGBTQ rights organization in Florida, was right in front of us. And one of their senior staff people approached our lead staffer in Florida and said to him, "Look, I know that things have been rough for the Jewish community and that people might be feeling vulnerable. So I want you to know, if things heat up today, at any point, you and everyone from Keshet should just merge into our contingent and we will surround you." That is a depth of connection and solidarity that comes from working side by side, even when it is really difficult and painful. It comes from striving to and succeeding in seeing each other's humanity and establishing real relationships across lines of difference. In these daunting times, I turn to these moments again and again for inspiration. I also turn to much earlier times in our work, and I'm so amazed at how far we have come despite all of the challenges today. So last May marked the 20th anniversary of marriage equality in this state. 20 years of being able to marry the person you love, no matter their gender. Now, when marriage equality became the law in Massachusetts, as I'm sure many of you recall, our opponents struck back immediately and tried to rescind this newly won right. Keshet led the Jewish community's effort to preserve marriage equality for good, working again closely with many at Temple Israel, as well as the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. But I have to share with you that I used to stand together with others in front of the Massachusetts State House holding a large banner that said, were you over there, Susie? Probably yes. That said, the Massachusetts Jewish community supports equal marriage. And in, let's say, a 2-hour shift, probably half a dozen people would come charging up to us with anger on their faces that we could see from where that tree is. And when they reached us, they would shout at us. And they would say, "How dare you stand here with this sign? You know that this is not what Jews believe." And the thing is, they were right. That wasn't what most Jews believed in 2001 as improbable as that sounds today. It wasn't what most people in this state believed, and certainly not what most people in this country believed. But although Jews are a minority in this state, our community's organizing efforts made a difference, just as Jews standing up for LGBTQ rights in places like Florida and Texas in more recent years has literally changed the outcome of legislative battles. We must continue to organize. We must continue to mobilize, just as we have done in the past, today and in the years ahead. At the 20th anniversary celebration of marriage equality last year, we heard from Mary Bonato, the lead attorney who won the case. She said to us, "We took what was unimaginable and we turned it into a joyous reality." Which of course is beautifully true, but what I think is even more extraordinary is that together we took what was unimaginable and we turned it into a perfectly ordinary reality. How many of you have kids, or how many of the kids here have grown up in a world where, of course, marriage equality exists? Okay, you could raise hands, but I see you're tired. It's okay. Thank you, Susie. Or a world with openly trans people in their lives. Or a world with an LGBTQ affirming rabbi or an LGBTQ rabbi. For so many kids and others today, these are just ordinary realities, and it's unimaginable that life was ever any other way. I will be stepping down as CEO of Keshet on July 31st. And as I reflect on my life after that, when I will no longer be a professional queer Jew, so I'll stop getting that question, I ask myself, what are the visions of justice today that feel beyond imagination, yet in 20 years might just be the ordinary reality of our lives? I hope that all of you will join me in continuing to seize the unimaginable and transforming it into an ordinary reality. And just think, how glorious will that be? Shabbat Shalom.